He never really talked about being lonely. That was the thing about him. He had learned to carry it quietly, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that people around him could easily notice. He just moved through his days like someone who had already made peace with the idea that certain things were simply not meant for him. Love was one of those things. He had tried before. He just went back to his routine. Woke up, went to work, came home, made himself something to eat, and sat with the kind of silence that slowly becomes your only company. His friends would sometimes ask him why he was still alone. He would smile and say he was busy. They believed him because it was easier for everyone that way. The truth was, he had slowly stopped believing in the idea that someone would ever really stay. Not because he was a bad person. He was actually quite kind. The sort of person who remembered small details about others, who would show up when it mattered, who gave more than he probably should have, more times than he could count. So he stopped reaching out. He did not swear off love or become cold. He simply lowered his expectations quietly and privately until they were just low enough that life felt manageable again. He filled his days with work. He kept himself busy. He told himself he was content, and some mornings he actually believed it. His small apartment was neat and simple. Not cold, but not warm either. There were books on the shelf he had read twice. A mug he always used for his evening tea. A window he liked to sit near when the sky was changing colours. These little things were his world, and he had arranged them carefully so that the emptiness did not feel quite so loud. People who did not know him well probably thought he was doing fine. Between going through the days and genuinely feeling them, he had been surviving for so long that he had almost forgotten what the other thing felt like. He was not waiting for anyone. He was not the kind of person sitting by a phone hoping someone would call. He had moved past that. His life was quiet and organized and moving forward in its own way. He had plans, small ones, practical ones. He was saving money. He was learning something new. He was not standing still. There was still something that had not gone away, a small and stubborn warmth that refused to be buried completely. He did not feed it. He did not talk to it, like an ember that somehow stays lit even after you stop paying attention to it. He did not know it then, but that part of him, that quiet, almost forgotten part, was about to be found. Not because he went looking, not because he asked the universe for anything. He was just living his ordinary life. It started with something so small that if you told the story at a dinner table, not because it was funny in a silly way, but because it was the kind of thing that makes you shake your head and think, really? She had sent a message to the wrong person. It was that simple. She was trying to reach someone she knew through a shared group, a mutual connection. The kind of person you message about something practical, a detail, a question, a small piece of information you need. She typed quickly, did not double-check the name, and hit send. The message landed with him instead. He saw it and was confused for a moment, then typed back, honestly and without any awkwardness, that he did not think she had reached the right person. He was polite about it. He could have just ignored it, but he was the kind of person who responded to things properly. He said there was nothing to apologize for. These things happen. She thanked him for being kind about it. He said, of course. It was not a big thing. It was just the way he wrote. There was a calm to it, a lack of sharpness. She had been dealing with a lot of impatient people lately, a lot of short replies and clipped tones. And here was someone who had no reason to be warm to her, but was warm anyway. She said something small, just a single line, something slightly beyond what the situation required. Not flirty, not bold, just a tiny bit more human than the conversation called for. Like two people testing whether the other one wanted to keep talking without either of them. They talked for a little while that day. Just the kind of conversation that happens when two curious people find themselves accidentally in each other's space and decide it is not entirely unpleasant. He found himself smiling once or twice without quite knowing why. She found herself checking her phone more than she normally would. When they stopped talking, neither of them made a big deal of it. There were no declarations, no exchanges of promises to talk again, just a natural pause, the kind that could easily become the end of the whole thing. A day later, she thought of something small, something in their conversation had reminded her of, a thought she wanted to share, or a question she realized she had not asked. She had a reason to message again, the kind that comes with an easy way out in case the other person did not respond with the same calm warmth as before, like it was completely natural, like no time had passed, like they were just continuing something that had never really stopped. But in that quiet way that real things tend to begin, without anyone declaring anything at all. Just two people finding that the other one was surprisingly, unexpectedly easy to talk to. Neither of them had been looking for this. He had stopped looking a long time ago. She was not in a place in her life where she had made space for something new, a small extra word that one of them chose to add. And suddenly, something that had not existed a week ago was now a thread that both of them, without saying it out loud, were careful not to pull too hard and break. Some things start with a big moment. This one started with a typo. If you asked either of them when exactly it changed, when the talking became something more than just talking, neither of them could give you a clean answer. There was no single evening, no one conversation that flipped a switch. It was more like a season changing. You do not see the exact moment it happens. You just look up one day and realize the air is different. They had fallen into a rhythm without meaning to. There would be a few days of messages, then a quiet stretch. Then one of them would surface with something small, a thought, a question, a detail from their day that for some reason they wanted to share with this particular person. And that was the thing neither of them examined too closely at first. The fact that out of all the people they could have told something to, they kept choosing each other. He started noticing that she made him think differently. She had a way of looking at ordinary things from angles he had not considered. She would say something about a completely simple subject, a book she had read, something she had observed on her way somewhere. And he would sit with it for a while after she left thoughts in him the way certain songs do. You hear them once and somehow they stay. She, on the other hand, had started to notice that he was steady. In a world full of people who were loud one day and gone the next, he was just consistently there. He did not perform for her. He did not try too hard. He just showed up in his honest, quiet way. And there was something about that, something about a person who does not pretend, that felt rare enough to be worth paying attention to. The conversations got longer, not because they planned for them to, but because they kept finding things to say. She would be in the middle of something and a thought would arrive. He would find this interesting. Or she would read something and think, I want to tell him about this. He was becoming a presence in her daily life in the most natural, uncalculated way. He found himself more open than usual. This surprised him. He was not someone who talked about himself easily. He had learned over the years to keep certain things to himself, not out of secrecy, just out of the habit of not expecting others to care enough. He talked about things he had not talked about in a long time. Old dreams he had quietly let go of. Moments that had shaped him in ways he rarely explained to anyone. Not in a polite way, not in the way people listen while waiting for their turn to speak. She would bring something up weeks later, something small he had mentioned in passing, and it would catch him off guard every time, because it meant she had been paying attention. There were moments that felt almost too comfortable, like the time they talked so late that neither of them realized what time it had become. And when they finally noticed, the only response was a kind of shared, quiet disbelief. Not regret, just surprise at how completely time had disappeared. Or the time they disagreed about something, genuinely disagreed. And instead of the conversation going cold, it got warmer. Because they were both curious about the other person's view. They wanted to understand, not to win. Something was being built between them, quietly and steadily, one conversation at a time. Something real and textured and grounded in actual knowing of each other. He knew how she thought about things. She knew what made him go quiet. These were the kinds of details that you only gather from genuine time and genuine attention. The thing that was slowly becoming impossible to ignore. They danced around it, not dishonestly, but carefully. Because when something feels fragile and precious, you do not rush toward it. You try not to startle it. You let it find its own shape before you try to name it. It had been forming for weeks. Anyone watching from the outside would have seen it immediately. The way he softened when her name appeared. The way she smiled at things he said, even when she was alone. The way they had both, without discussing it, quietly made more room for each other in their everyday lives. They had built a language that was only theirs. There is a moment in most real love stories, not the ones that are written to be perfect, but the ones that are actually true, where everything gets complicated, where the warmth that has been building quietly suddenly comes up against all the old, unhealed parts of a person. It is usually very quiet. One evening, in the middle of what had become their natural rhythm of conversation, something shifted in him. It was not anything she said or did. She had been exactly herself, warm, present, easy. And the old familiar fear arrived, the one that had been waiting patiently at the back of him for exactly this moment. The voice was not cruel. It was just very calm and very sure of itself. It said, "This is the part where it ends. You have been here before. You know how this goes. You let yourself care about someone, and then one day, without much explanation, they are simply no longer there." He did not say any of this to her. He just went quiet. A small but noticeable cooling of the warmth that had been so consistent. He started taking a little longer to respond. His messages became slightly shorter. Not cold, but not the same. Like someone slowly dimming a light without explaining why. She felt it immediately. Of something changes, even slightly. She did not panic. She was not the type to spiral loudly. And she asked herself quietly whether she had misread something. Whether she had been more invested than he was. Whether what had felt like something mutual was actually something more one-sided than she had. She gave it space. She did not chase. She did not flood him with questions or try to force the conversation back to where it had been. She respected the distance, even while it hurt a little. Without explanation, then she would be okay. She had been okay before. She would be okay again. After a few days of that quiet distance, she sent him something simple. Just a few honest words that said, "I have noticed the shift. I am not going to pretend I have not. And I am not asking you to be anything you are not. But I wanted you to know that whatever this is, it matters to me." He read it and sat very still for a long time. Something about the honesty of it broke through. Not in a dramatic way. Just in the way that truth does when you have been hiding from it. It finds you eventually. And when it does, the hiding starts to feel more exhausting than the truth itself. He realized, sitting there with her words in front of him, that the fear he was acting on was not really about her. She had done nothing to earn that wall. She had been consistent and real and honest and present. He had been protecting himself from something she had never threatened. Not with a speech, not with a grand explanation. Just with the truth, simply said. He told her that he had been pulling back. He told her why. Not everything, but enough. He said he was sorry for making her feel the distance without giving her any reason for it. That the thought of actually losing this, losing her, felt worse than the fear that had made him pull away in the first place. She did not make him feel bad for it. She did not use it against him. She just said, "I understand. I have my own fears about this. This is new territory for me as well." That exchange, that small, vulnerable, honest exchange, changed something. It was not a resolution of everything. Fear does not vanish in a single conversation. Between them was real enough to be worth the risk of being honest about. The storm had come, not because the fear was gone. There is something different about love that has been tested, not love that has been through enormous tragedy, necessarily. Just love that has been through the honest, human discomfort of two real people choosing each other with their eyes open. It has a different quality to it, less like a fairy tale and more like a home you have actually lived in. Imperfect, familiar, not with a grand gesture or a perfect cinematic moment. Just with a gradual, settled understanding that this was real, that it mattered, and that both of them had actively chosen to be here. There is a difference between landing somewhere by drift and choosing to be somewhere. They had done the choosing. She had stopped wondering whether she had imagined it. The consistency she had seen in him from the very beginning had only grown deeper over time. He was not the kind of person who said things he did not mean. So, when he showed up, in the small daily ways and in the larger, harder moments, she believed it. Not with the anxious, hopeful belief of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. With the calm, steady belief of someone who had been shown the same thing enough times that doubt no longer had much room. Who had learned to expect little, so that losing things would not hurt so much, had slowly, not by a single moment, like water that shapes a stone. Not because it is forceful, but because it keeps coming back. She had kept coming back. There was an evening they both remembered later, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because it felt ordinary in a way that nothing had felt ordinary in a long time. They were talking about nothing important, not in a loud, celebratory way, just in the quiet, easy way of someone who has come home after a very long journey and finally taken off their coat. She felt it too, in her own way. The absence of the restlessness that had always been somewhere under the surface of her. She had always been a person with a lot going on inside, curious, moving, always on to the next thought. Not because he was boring, because he was safe, was something she had not fully understood the value of until she found it. When they looked back on how it started, they still found it quietly remarkable. A tiny extra word that one of them chose to add. Of all the ways two people could have found each other, this was perhaps the most unassuming. No matchmaking, no search, no careful effort. Just an accident that neither of them could have planned. She would sometimes say she believed in the idea that the right people find each other somehow. Not through magic, but through the way life is always quietly arranging things beneath the surface. That all the small decisions, the ones that seem random at the time, are building a path that eventually leads somewhere meaningful. She could not prove it. How close it came to never happening at all. He was more practical in his thinking, generally. He did not lean easily toward the poetic from something this accidental. He had the evidence of it every day. The ease, the realness, the way it had grown steadily without force. And none of that felt random to him, even if he could not say exactly why. What they had was not a perfect story. It had real people in it, with real fears and real silences and real moments of uncertainty. It had the awkward middle part, the pulling away, the quiet panic, the honest conversation that was hard to start but necessary to have. All of it was in there. Some people wait their whole lives for a love that announces itself, for something that arrives with certainty and fanfare and an obvious sign. They come quietly, sideways, through a wrong turn that somehow leads to exactly the right place. He had stopped believing anyone was coming. She had not been looking for anyone to find. She had found him by accident.